Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Berne Declaration and Greenpeace, I would like to welcome you to the press conference of the 2014 Public Eye Awards, and I thank you all for coming. In your press kit, you will find the program of today's press conference. After the presentations, there will be time for a Q&A, so you will have some time to ask our speakers and the members of the Public Eye Awards team some questions. And after the Q&A, we will have time for the pre-arranged interviews. And even if you didn't arrange an interview, you're more than welcome to stick around. Just please approach someone from the Public Eye Awards team to arrange an interview with the speakers or with us. Before we give the floor to our speakers, I would like to look back on the beginnings of the Public Eye and how it all started, and recapitulate why, 14 years later, sadly, there is still a need for campaigns like ours that demand corporate accountability. It's been 14 years since we first held the Public Eye here in Davos. Only 2 months after the Battle of Seattle against the World Trade Organization in the year 2000, we first held the Public Eye on Davos. The aim was to reflect critically on the World Economic Forum and to discuss a socially and environmentally more sustainable world economy, as opposed to the neoliberal model propagated by the participants of the World Economic Forum. Since then, some things have changed, but others have remained exactly the same. While business opportunities for global corporations continue to increase and multinationals are becoming even more powerful, corporate accountability still hasn't kept pace with this development. While voluntary initiatives to respect human rights and the environment are blooming, you will see later in our speeches that many still face exploitation and repression in their struggles for justice. Standing up against powerful corporations is a tough fight that often takes place in the absence of legally binding measures that oblige companies to respect human rights and the environment. This gap makes it very hard for people around the world to claim their rights and seek the justice they're entitled to. The Public Eye Awards aim to demonstrate the necessity of effective and legally binding measures on a national and international level to ensure corporations are held accountable for their wrongdoings, no matter where these wrongdoings occur. We provide a platform to publicly criticize cases of human rights violations, environmental destruction, and corruption. The date and location of the Public Eye Awards are set deliberately to coincide with the World Economic Forum's annual meeting, because those hiding behind closed doors to allegedly improve the state of the world often contribute to these irresponsible business practices themselves. And we are here to remind corporations that the social and environmental consequences of their business activities not only affect people and the environment, but also the reputation of their company. Since 2005, when we started with the awards concept, 21 corporations have received a Public Eye Award. Today, 2 additional companies will have the dubious honor of calling themselves Public Eye Award winners. But before we come to the more glamorous part and the announcement of the winners of the Public Eye Awards, we would like to give the floor to our speakers, who will address topics as diverse yet interrelated as the economics of evil, the state of corporate power, and the consequences of irresponsible business practices on people all around the world. First, I would like to give the floor to Czech economist, lateral thinker, and former advisor to Václav Havel, Mr. Thomas Sedlacek, who will be raising some important questions, such as whether growth really is the only option, or whether it still pays off to be good. Please welcome Mr. Thomas Sedlacek.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to speak at this year's Public Eye Award. Of course, we economists used to be quite good at focusing on the sunny side up of capitalism and the sunny side up of economics and the sunny side up of globalization. And only now we are slowly realizing that there is a dark side of the moon connected to that as well. that's why I would like to focus on, in my 15 minutes, on the economics of evil. You know, there's, first of all, there is the unintended evil. You know, if only all problems of the world related to the economy were a sort of a Berne Madoff case, which is a clear case where law was broken, and you could actually sentence this man, and if law is restored, then the problem is sorted out. The problem is that this is not the biggest problem. If only all the problems were the cases of excessive gluttony and carelessness, like we see portrayed in many modern Wall Street movies, such as the American Psycho, if you've seen that one, or books like City Boy, etc., where, you know, perverted psychopaths perversely abuse the system. The question is much more complex and much more complicated. Most of the people who cause the biggest problems in our crises and in this world that we live in were actually quite nice and often didn't even mean to do any evil. It is what certain structures resemble what John Paul II once called sinful structures. Each person in such a structure is a nice person with no evil intent whatsoever, yet as a result, evil is created. This is a little bit, again, because I like movies, this reminds me a little bit of the movie The Cube, the horror movie, I don't know if you recall. Basically, 12 people get trapped in a Rubicon-like box, which is of huge magnitude, and they are being tortured and eventually killed in a really brutal way. It's a little bit Kafka-like scenario. They don't know what is it that they've done. They don't know why do they have to suffer for this. And only later in the movie we realize that each one of them has actually contributed to building this cube, which is so vicious and self-torturing. So in a way, this is the problem with specialization, that the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing, or vice versa. Anyway, so evil is created even without evil intent, which is something that that John Paul called. Unfortunately, he only mentioned this once. I think it's a thought that should be further developed. The thought of a sinful structure, where the evil lies in the cracks of specialization, so to speak. Secondly, we can get used to evil like we got used to child labor and to slavery. For many generations, this was something normal, something that went along the liberal idea that, you know, as long as it's free, you can do with it what you will. This is similar to the banality of evil, which is something that Hannah Arendt talks about in her famous book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, where you could actually follow a similar logic with the allegations against the financial world or against the banking world. We often also say, well, we don't know, we were just following the law. And obviously the standards of us human beings, luckily, are higher than that of the law. We must understand that the law is here only to keep the minimum standards, not to meet the highest standards of human spirit. So, of course, the allegedly existing invisible hand of the markets will never lead us out of a situation like the banality of evil, when we all get used to bad results happening to people who are simply following the law. So you need an external force, an external eye, an open public eye must play this role. Adam Smith, as a founder of economics, he believed in sort of the inside observer, somebody who actually forces you from within to be a good person rather than a bad person. If such an internal force collapses, then an external force, or at least an external eye, must be present. The view of a significant other cannot be replaced. And this is why I am happy that an external criticism such as the public eye actually exists. This is why we need to care for business, not against business, but for the sake of business. Second thing that I want to talk about is the culture of markets. It is very often believed that culture itself will help alleviate human spirit. It is also often believed that democracy itself will help alleviate human spirit, and it was also in the like manner believed that business itself will better the conditions of human beings. We have overlooked a very important area. It is not just culture what matters, it is the culture of culture. You know that many cultures or even art was built on one nation propaganda against another nation, and we have had here in Europe situation when culture was misused in order to murder and kill people. So if the culture itself is not cultured, then that culture can be evil. Now the same thing goes for democracy. Democracy is something that is a best system that we have, but it is not natural. If you let go of the steering wheel, you will not end up in democracy. It is theoretically democratic for the rest of the society to decide that, for example, redheads are dangerous and that they should be kept jailed, or their freedoms should be limited. This is something that's actually a democratic decision, but it does not really follow the culture of democracy. And we have seen democracies go wrong very often in democratic procedures. Now, the same then holds for markets. Markets and businesses must have a culture as well. Now, if you look actually at the history of just let's take Europe alone, let's not take the whole world, but if you only take Europe as such, the history of Europe, and you look on the amount of democracy that we have, you will very quickly learn that democracy was something that we had in absolute minority. There were a couple of democratic villages, today we would say not even cities, in the ancient Greek, and then nothing for many hundreds and even thousands of years. And now, let's say for the past 200 years, in some countries of Europe, we have democracy, but you must also exclude totalitarian regimes such as communism and Nazism. Those would not be democratic. So you see that if you actually look at the time-space of democratic existence in Europe alone, now forgetting the rest of the world, democracy would be in a huge minority. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that a well-functioning democracy, like well-functioning markets, is not something that's natural. It's not a default system. You simply need to care for it. You need to nurture it. You can't let it go on some invisible autopilot. Because I was expecting more younger people, and this is no insult. I had the courage to quote U2, but now that I think of it, young people don't listen to U2 anymore, so I think it's actually our generation, the medieval people. There's a very nice quote from U2 in their song, maybe the most famous song from U2, called One, which says, "Love leaves you, baby, if you don't care for it." And the same, I think, could be said of democracy, the same could be said of culture, and the same could be said of markets themselves. I can only drive 120 kilometers an hour if I give up the freedom to wiggle my hands like this, if I give up the freedom to close my eyes for more than a fraction of a second. I can only enter a highway if I reasonably believe that everybody else will limit their freedoms likewise. The faster you go, the smaller freedom you have to do this with your car. It is very often believed that rules and regulations go against the freedom of the markets, and this actually is not the case. They go very often hand in hand. Let me give a stupid, ridiculous example, and that is the example of language. Language is nothing else but a set of laws, rules, and regulations. And by breaching these rules, laws, and regulations, I will not be a freer person if I just start blah, 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 breaking everything that I could when it comes to rules and regulations of language. Now, take poetry, for example. Poetry is nothing else but additional set of, in the views of many, ridiculous rules and regulations as to how sentences should be formed. There must be a rhyme, or there should be some sort of a rhythm. Yet, this extra set of rules is something that makes human spirit, or the expression thereof, much more freer. Now, talking about the speed on the highway, speed or growth is something that has become a predominant economic topic ever since the crises begin. Talking about speed, would it be a correct assessment to say that we have co-created a system which is very speedy, but at the same time unstable? It is very volatile and grows at the impressive speed, but then it collapses at a whim. So a lot of people say that the economy is depressed, which I think is a fundamental misdiagnosis. The economy is not depressed. The economy is manic depressed. And let's have a look on the way the American crisis has started, which actually has a huge bearing with what the Public Eye Award is actually about. Please recall that the American system, the American business system, the American banking or American financial institutions did not collapse during a depression. They collapsed during the manic period. In other words, in the United States of America, you could see something that I call a full throttle bankruptcy. In other words, the system was going very quickly. There was actually a very respectable amount of growth for a long period of time in the United States of America. Unemployment was low, efficiency was high, competitiveness was very high, etc., etc. So there was not a cloud in the sky, a little bit perhaps like today from a macroeconomic point of view. And this exactly was the time when the system went into a collapse. It's, I think, humorous, to say the least, that we're trying to remedy the system today by reinstalling same conditions as were present in 2007. Now, this is what I think the danger of our civilization. The danger of our civilization isn't in our weaknesses. I would see a bigger of a danger for us as a society, as a civilization, actually in our strength. And this crisis that we're still sort of seeing is a fine example of that. Companies started misbehaving not because a threat of bankruptcy or threat of poverty or threat of hunger was at stake, but companies misbehave very often in exactly the opposite momentum, and that is when they're big, when they have no immediate threat at hand. This is the moment when they turn manic and become what we call perhaps mischievous. Now that I started with U2, there's also a nice quote, and this is the last U2 quote, which goes, "Baby, slow down. The ending's not as fun as the start." It would be during the manic times that we have a tendency to be more dangerous to ourselves. What we have done as a Western civilization in the past, we have sold stability in order to buy speed. What must be done now on the macroeconomic level as well as on the level of companies is to reverse this, to buy back stability and sell speed, sell profit in this dirt. The fourth topic that I want to touch about is a paraphrase on a very famous New Testament line, and that is a sentence that I think all the people that are involved in the business of business are actually saying without really realizing this, and that is, "Forgive us, for we do not know what we are doing." I had the honor of being a part of the Davos meeting 2 years ago, and at the end of the meeting, we met together with other people from the World Economic Forum, with the people who were actually protesting against Davos and against the World Economic Forum. And there were many points that were actually justified, but the one that I remember the most was, and I actually paid very close attention to it, every single speech of every economist ended in a way, well, I'm not really sure, but. So the fact really is that we do not know what we are doing. Now, you can look on money in many different ways. Money is a huge mystery, even to the most deep-thinking philosophers of economics. But one way to look on money is that it is sort of energy. Now, once you deal with this energy, be it in a company or be it in a bank, you are actually meddling with a huge amount of energy which you cannot completely control. Now, the next topic that I want to talk about is actually the very controversial topic on the invisible hand of the society, which will also be my last topic. I will actually surprise you. I do believe in invisible hand, but not of the markets, but of the society. For some strange reason, it's quite mysterious, there is a self-regulatory hand of the society which corrects itself. It doesn't work perfectly, but it works. A fine proof that it does is that we are actually still here as a society. As destructive as we can be, we always have a way to correct ourselves. So when a part of the society breaks a leg, for example, economics in 2008, in this case, politics came to its aid. But you see it also working the other way around. In some situation, it is politics that is aided by the economy. In other terms, it's the arts that are criticizing the business or politics, etc., etc., etc. Now, we must defetishize economics. I don't know how it happened that the mysterious and wonderful working of this invisible hand was privatized by businesses only, and we are ignoring the fact that actually we need the whole civilization, the whole society to regulate businesses or parts of the society that have a tendency to walk astray. This, I think, is also one other reason why I think it's good that we have an institution like this which corrects the tendency which I think each one of us have, even if you are an economist or an artist or a politician or even a microphone producer, we all have a tendency to become, this is a beautiful German word which is called Fachidioten, and we need other people to show us, perhaps even in an idiotic way, but still show us that the world is not just what we've studied. So thank you very much, and I congratulate the companies. I was not, of course, in the committee, but I congratulate the companies that have become the winners. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sedlacek, for this very interesting insight and for pointing out that we need to factor in all the variables into the equation, also the risk for people's lives and the environment. I would like to now introduce to you Ms. Brit Brennan. She's the Program Coordinator for Economic Justice, Corporate Power and Alternatives at the Transnational Institute of Policy Studies in the Netherlands. And she will be she will be presenting the Institute's new report, The State of Corporate Power, and we'll touch on some key developments in shifts of wealth and power of transnational corporations and their CEOs in comparison to the further losses and impoverishment of the 99%. Please welcome Ms. Brit Brennan.
Thank you, and good morning. It's indeed a privilege and a pleasure to be here at the Public Eye Awards and to have a few minutes to share with you some of the analysis and insights from the work of the Transnational Institute. And maybe also at least touch on some of the background to the mysteries and the mantras that Thomas has just dealt with. It's interesting yesterday in the Financial Times that there was this headline that the elite at Davos this year were feeling a little threatened compared to the kinds of concerns they had over the last 4 years since 2008. Every year, the World Economic Forum had the big agenda of the crisis, the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the euro crisis, etc. But it seems this year there's some sense that these type of crises are underhand, and according to Gideon Rachman, the concern for 2014 is actually the rise of populism. I will come back to that later. But this morning, since it's a rather short time frame, there are 5 points that I would just like to raise with you for your consideration. The first is that, well, the handling of the crisis. I mean, maybe some of us perhaps thought in 2008, this is one of the tipping points in terms of taking a new direction in the economy, at least in terms of taking some substantive regulation of banks and financial corporations and how they operate, as well as also the issues of tax, etc., which are a big portion, tax evasion, a big portion of the big profits of the corporations that are often here under the public eye awards. In actual fact, over the last 5 years, but even in 2013, corporations have continued to gain enormously from the crisis. And it is none less than Paul Krugman who said, actually, well, you know, the measures that have addressed the crisis are not really about fixing the crisis. They are really measures that have continued to uphold the status quo and the operations of transnational corporations as we have known them. We have seen that in 2013, for example, the richest section of the population have continued to grow ultra-rich. In actual fact, 40% of the global businesses are mainly controlled by the banks and the financial corporations. We have also seen that in terms of the growth of profits that have marked the first 9 months of 2013, I think we have it here in the slide. Yeah, the world's ultra-rich have got 11% wealthier the first 9 months of 2013, while I think those of us who live in Europe even, but also around the world, the actual income of people has fallen through loss of livelihood and through unemployment. So the winners and losers can be, in a way, easily identified. The winners continue to be the corporations and the bigger corporations. The type of the gains that have been made by the corporations, maybe we can get a sense of the proportions if we consider that the gains made by the top 100 richest people are equivalent to 1,000 years of Rwanda's public government expenditure, or equivalent to 130 years of the costs of climate change adaptation. So this is really a major feature of what's wrong with the current economic system. But it's not only the question of the ultra-rich and how their wealth continues to increase. It's also a question of concentration. The concentration of the wealth of the world in the hands of a very few large corporations. In a study of 41,000 companies and corporations, the vast majority of the 37 of the world's largest economies are corporations. So 37 corporations are larger than many of the countries of the world. The second point I would like to raise is the question of, and this is very much central to the agenda of the Public Eye Awards, is the question of accountability and the question of impunity of transnational corporations. It's Jeremy Sachs who said that there's a culture of impunity. I think Thomas also touched on this in the sense that we've grown used to the fact that, well, this is how corporations operate anyway. But in actual fact, this culture of impunity, yes, exists at one level in the public consciousness and the public opinion, but also there is an architecture of impunity which has been created by in a sense, the collaboration that exists between corporations and governments. Corporations have been able, and I think we can go back as far as 40 years ago with the imposition of the coup in Chile, corporations have been able to create the governments or create the conditions of collaboration with government whereby the system of deregulation, privatization, etc., creates the environment in which impunity is absolutely a part, and where corporations have refused over the decades to accept any binding responsibilities for their operations. This architecture of impunity, well, maybe it's like the cube that Thomas referred to. It's quite an arsenal, actually. It's the arsenal of free trade agreements, it's international investment agreements, but it's also the institutions and instruments that are able to force this into legislation, into changing national constitutions, into changing laws. So we have the expression of this in, well, even if we look at the very latest session of the World Trade Organization in Bali, where the big agenda was really the corporate agenda of trade facilitation, which was run through. And we have no less than Acevedo, the new Director General of the World Trade Organization, saying in a very enthusiastically, actually, and very convincingly on Brazilian television that corporations love the WTO. They love the World Trade Organization. They need it, and the world couldn't run the way it's running without it. Besides these institutions, there is the law of the market. Thomas has been indicating in a way maybe the more philosophical considerations about the market, but in actual fact, the market also it remains very much part of the structure in which corporations can work and operate with impunity. One of the instruments, in a way, we tend to think that, you know, the stock market is the main instrument of the market, but actually there are other instruments, and one of them is the ICSID, the Center for the Settlement of International Disputes. This is one of the more notorious instruments where corporations can sue governments, but governments cannot sue corporations. And to give an example from 2013 also, the ICSID awarded, it's also called an award, awarded Petroleum Occidental the sum of $203 billion US. This is a fine which the Ecuadorian government is compelled to pay to Occidental Petroleum Company, a US company. This is equivalent to 59% of the Ecuador's annual budget, and it's equivalent to 135% of their annual healthcare budget. This asymmetry that exists in the whole juridical system, well, you know, examples and case studies can be multiplied. However, I think, what I would like also to raise is the fact that while we have binding obligations on governments, and we have instruments to implement them, we don't have similar instruments for transnational corporations. There isn't any binding treaty on transnational corporations. And this, in a sense, coupled with the fact that what we do have is a voluntary system of corporate social responsibility, creates a situation that even though companies are maybe in national courts charged with fraud or with tax evasion or with corruption, and certain heads of CEOs will resign or will be toppled, in actual fact, the situation corporate social responsibility remains a very weak instrument. But I would also like to flag up, and I think this is really important for those of you journalists who are following the World Economic Forum, it's not just the inroads in the way in which our economy is running, but it's also the way in which our democracies are functioning. Especially one of the recent major reports of the World Economic Forum, the Global Redesign Initiative, called Everybody's Business, is really promoting a new formula for government. And this is multi-stakeholderism. That is that, well, governance is no longer the question or the responsibility or even the capability of governments. It's, this has to be the question, this has to be a new system where corporations mainly will have a major say in governments and how we are governed. Maybe my last point is, of course, historically, both inside the UN system, but also outside it, and also in initiatives from the ground, there have been major efforts to, of course, not only challenge the system, but to change it. And I would like to flag up the Extraterritorial Obligations Initiative and the Global Campaign to Dismantle Corporate Power. We are very much at a moment where there is a new convergence around this things. While it looks like, you know, the World Economic Forum is on to business as usual, maybe with some new dimensions. But in actual fact, there is also a convergence growing among social movements and trade unions and others who are dealing with corporations on the ground. And one of the major aspects of this is it's not just any longer a question of critique, it's a question of creation of transformative alternatives. And we can say more about this maybe in the question and answer. Thank you. By the way, the State of Power report, there's some parts of it down on the table for any of you.
Thank you, Brit. We've now heard about the sheer unlimited power of corporations and the architecture of impunity that allows international corporations to act irresponsibly at the expense of people and the environment. While companies are trying to paint a rosy picture of their corporate behavior, we shed a critical light on their business activities. And I think it's high time now to present the nominations of the 2014 Public Eye Awards and to announce the winner of the Jury Award. It's my pleasure to introduce to you member of the jury of the Public Eye Awards and Executive Director of Greenpeace International, Mr. Kumi Naidu.
Thank you, Sylvie. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. This year, we received 19 awards from around the world, 15 of which was formally accepted. The issues that the nominees put forward in terms of bad corporate behavior included land grabbing, mass environmental destruction, corruption, business activities that have hurt the health of local communities, and several other issues. Of the nominated organizations, 8 companies were accepted by the jury, 3 from the extractive industry, 3 corporates that work in pesticides, 1 from the aquaculture sector, 1 company from the garment industry, and 1 international sports promoting organization, FIFA, also an industry in itself today. The numbers of people that voted this year was significantly more than last year. It exceeded 300,000 people, and we were very pleased with the quality of the nominations that we got from NGOs and community-based organizations from around the world. And we want to say, as a jury, a very big thank you to all the organizations that took the time to make those nominations. Before I announce the award itself, I'd like to just make a few comments. And in the spirit of transparency, I just want to say that I do have this badge. I'm also on the inside, and I've been there for 2 days. So let me just tell you my quick impressions. So what you see is that the issues that civil society organizations and social movements are concerned about, on face value, when you look at the program of the World Economic Forum, you think, oh wow, the World Economic Forum is putting its finger on the key issues, because this year, for the first time, they are talking about income inequality. They are talking about climate, poverty, and so on. But on closer scrutiny, what you see is really an attempt to actually protect and maintain the current system, with simply trying to deliver small, incremental, marginal improvements at best without affecting the system. So what we have been saying, many of us, is that what we need now is not system maintenance, which is what the World Economic Forum is about, but what we need is actually system redesign and system transformation. And that is where the major disconnect is between the aspirations of the 99% versus the power of the 1%. So they also have been talking a lot this year in the World Economic Forum about the shifting nature of power. But they are, I would say, all the participants of the World Economic Forum, I said it yesterday in one of the panels, are suffering from a terrible case of cognitive dissonance, meaning that all the facts are there right in front of their eyes, that we are running out of time, especially given the reality of the climate crisis, and that in fact, what I suggested in a piece I published yesterday in Huffington Post is maybe we should not only be thinking about the shifting nature of power, but the shifting power of nature. Because right now, unless corporate leaders and business leaders recognize that nature does not negotiate, and that you cannot change the science around what the climate reality is, that in fact you got to change political will. And I just want to close before I announce the award by just putting a reality check on the table. As 30 people were languishing in a prison in Russia last year for close to 3 months, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their every 5-year assessment. And I'll just give you a one-line assessment where they say that basically we are running out of time, that we have to act with greater urgency, and importantly, that we have to leave between 60 and 80% of known fossil fuel reserves where they are if we are to have a chance to avert catastrophic climate change. And then you ask yourself, and I want to make one controversial point here, and then if you ask yourself why, these are intelligent people, these are good, as you say, many of them are very, when you talk to them, they are parents, they are grandparents, they, you know, they go to church or other religious institutions, they, you know, want to believe they're not abusing their wives and doing other horrible things. But the bottom line is they are in denial about the reality that we have to move fast. And when you ask the question why, I think one reason for it is those that are making and sucking profit at the moment from the current way in which particularly energy is delivered, because we have a global economy that is driven by dirty brown fossil fuel based energy, and we need to have an energy revolution that takes us to clean, green, renewable driven economy. But why is there a lack of urgency? And I know these days it's not very fashionable to talk about the north-south distinctions, but the reality is that the people that are paying the first and most brutal price for climate impacts are in Africa because of climate-induced drought, it's in the Philippines because of typhoons, it is in the Pacific island states because of sea level rise, it's on the Bangladeshi coast because of sea level rise, and I can take you around the world. It's not as if rich countries are not facing climate impacts, but who runs the big corporations? With few exceptions, still the majority of the big corporations in the world are still northern based, northern controlled. It's changing, of course, with some actors. And the reality is that the people in the countries that are in the front line of experiencing impacts sadly do not come from the places where there are powerful corporations or governments that have power. So with those words, it is not with pleasure that I, you know, when you announce an award, you say it is with pleasure. So without any pleasure, I'd like to announce the winner of the Public Eye Jury Award. So I just want to clarify that there are two awards for those of you who are new. The jury makes one award, which we are announcing now, and then the jury also comes out with a short list of organizations where people around the world vote, and that award will be announced later. So the jury award went to the US clothes manufacturer, Gap, which was nominated by 3 wonderful civil society organizations, a new one called Some of Us, which is an online corporate campaigning organization, the International Labor Rights Forum, and the United Students Against Sweatshops. So in the name of the jury, I thank and congratulate the nominees for this very powerful and well-articulated nomination. The jury, without hesitation, shames Gap for its monstrous and disingenuous business practices consisting of hindering legally binding agreements to substantially improve working conditions of workers who labor under some of the worst labor conditions in the world. So with those words, I'd like to invite Liana Foxkov, the Director for Organizing and Communications of the International Labor Rights Forum, to receive the award and say a few words.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you to the jury of the Public Eye Awards for raising the profile of workers' urgent demands for workplace safety and labor rights in the garment industry by bestowing this award on Gap Inc., which also owns the brands Old Navy and Banana Republic. And this award will support our campaign for workers' rights by making the company's irresponsible business practices even more well-known around the world. In planning our nomination, the International Labor Rights Forum, SomeOfUs.org, and United Students Against Sweatshops thought, what's the worst kind of irresponsible company? One that portrays an image of being a leader in responsibility while actively undermining real social responsibility. And that's how we decided to nominate GAP. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development guidelines, calls on multinational corporations like GAP to take steps to ensure occupational safety and health in their operations, including in their supply chains. After 29 workers were killed 3 years ago, trapped inside a GAP supplier factory in Bangladesh while a fire raged, ILRF, Clean Clothes Campaign, Worker Rights Consortium, Maquila Solidarity Network, and a group of unions started negotiating with GAP and a number of other companies for a factory safety program to make sure that such a preventable tragedy would never again happen in the Bangladesh garment industry. And GAP was consistently the one company that spent a lot of time talking with us and gave us numerous promises that they would do the right thing. But there was a deal breaker. GAP didn't want to be legally accountable to upholding commitments to safety. Not long after GAP broke away from the negotiations, 2 factory disasters of unparalleled scale occurred in Bangladesh. The Tazreen fire and the Rana Plaza building collapse, leaving 1,250 garment workers dead and thousands injured. But these horrific results of corporate negligence still weren't enough for GAP to finally listen to garment workers. Instead, the company did what they do best. They published a website called wearecommitted.com to hone their image as a model corporate citizen. And then they corralled some other companies into a safety program that is unaccountable to organized workers and their unions, and that does not provide meaningful protections for workers' rights to refuse dangerous work, and that does not require GAP to stick it out with their suppliers to ensure financing is available for factory renovations. When 7 workers were killed at a GAP supplier a few months later, just this past October, GAP expressed sorrow for the victims, but was then quick to deny a relationship with the Aswad factory. But let me show you. Here is the document showing GAP's presence. The Aswad workers are still waiting for GAP to pay compensation. And the garment workers in Cambodia, you may have heard in the news, where GAP and its brand Old Navy are by far the largest American buyers of clothing, are still waiting for GAP to recognize its responsibility for the unconscionably low wages, which are the root cause of the worker strikes and labor unrest, and to act to improve wages by paying higher prices to factories. GAP, when workers are being killed in your supply chain by armed forces who are shooting at them at protests, and when workers are trapped inside a factory during a fire, something is very wrong. This will not be fixed by a fancy website or a program that is hardly more than a facelift of the corporate-controlled programs that have failed workers and sidelined their unions in the past. GAP, it's time to listen to the workers who sew your clothing. Their hopes are but for a wage that will enable them to pay for their basic expenses without going into debt, so they can put nutritious food on the table for their families and not have to pull their kids out of school. They want their human rights, civil rights, and labor rights respected. It's incredible that in 2014, we have to talk about ensuring workers' right to refuse dangerous work. But GAP is not mentioning that anywhere in its public relations, so we will keep bringing it up until GAP finally signs on to the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh. GAP, we look forward to bringing this award directly to you in San Francisco. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Kalpona Akhtar, the Executive Director of the Bangladesh Center for Worker Solidarity, one of Bangladesh's most prominent labor rights advocacy organizations. BCWS is regarded by the international labor rights movement and by multinational apparel companies as among the most effective grassroots labor organizations in the country. Levi Strauss has called BCWS a globally respected labor rights organization which has played a vital role in documenting and working to remedy labor rights violations in the apparel industry in Bangladesh. Kalpona is one of my heroes. Her courage and tireless perseverance has inspired me in my activism for change in the global garment industry. In her circumstances of being harassed and jailed for being a fearless advocate for workers' rights, many other people might give up. However, Kalpona, who is actually a former child laborer, has kept hope alive that change for garment workers is possible. Thank you, Kalpona, for making the trip here all the way from Bangladesh to share with us today.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much to Public Eye to inviting me in this important program. And thanks, Liana, for introducing me in here. My activism in the garment industry is very personal. When I was 12, my father got ill, and he couldn't work and couldn't bring food in the table for us. So then me and my 10-year-old brother, we went to the factory, and I was sewed clothes for multinational companies and making less than $12 in a month, working over 450 hours work. That was the life looked like when I was in the factory. We were cheated on the overtime wage, and it was clearly a wage theft. We went to strike and we won. Few of my co-workers who joined in the strike, they fired. And then I came to know there is a law that's supposed to protect our rights. I started organizing my co-workers to join union. But management, all the time, they harassed me and fired, blacklisted, and I was just 16. Then I went to work for union, and then I co-founded the organization called Bangladesh Center for Worker Solidarity, where I work today, a worker center, and that educates workers about their rights and conducts research. I became an organizer and never stopped. Not when workers were beaten and tear-gassed for demanding higher wages, not when the government has made illegal our organization to operate, not when the factory owners brought falsified criminal charges against me and put me in jail, not even when my friend and co-organizer, the union organizer Aminul Islam, was disappeared, tortured, murdered, and all evidence pointing out to the National Security Intelligence. The garment industry is a major employer in Bangladesh. Over 4 million workers, more than 80% of whom are women, mostly from poor rural backgrounds. They make clothing for exports, mostly US and European brands and retailers who have flocked to the country to take advantage of rock-bottom wages. The minimum wage is only $68 per month, and that's after the wage hike a month ago. Due to inflation, it's not much more than I used to make 20 years back. Over 1,800 workers have been killed in a factory fire and building collapses in our garment industry since 2005, in a dozens of incidents. Since the Rana Plaza building collapse last April, there have been more fires. For example, in October at Ashwad, a Gap and Walmart supplier, where 7 workers were killed. 3 years ago, 29 workers were killed in a factory fire that Liana just mentioned, the factory called That's It Sportswear. The emergency exits were locked. All escape routes were cut off by the smokes. Soon after the fire, labor groups and the unions started negotiating with Gap to put an end to the constantly climbing death toll in the garment industry in Bangladesh. To the great dismay, the Gap refused to join a program with unions and instead launched a corporate controlled program with Walmart is accountable to no one other than the companies themselves. Gap has been highlighting its financing, but that's a program for the loans rather than direct financing to the factory's repair. Even after my country has experienced the deadliest garment industry disaster the world has ever seen, they are not increasing the prices they pay to the factories to include the cost of safety. The programs that we are calling to the Gap to join, and which they have so far refused, is one of the independent safety inspections with public reports, mandatory repairs and renovations to address all identified hazards. And a central role of the workers and unions include workers lead safety committees in all factories and access to the factories for unions to educate workers on how they can protect their rights and their safety, including their right to refuse dangerous work. The companies in the accord commit to the work with their suppliers to secure financing, maintaining orders, and ensure renovation are completed to make factory buildings in Bangladesh safe. The immediate cause of the incidents in Bangladesh are flammable material piled in the hallways or is illegal bottom floor room storage. So, literally the building has been constructed for residential. When the government, all the retailers raced to the Bangladesh with their orders, the country wasn't even ready to accept, all this business. So your bedroom, drawing room, and living room has been, the wall has been break down, and that became a factory. So they're not electrically approved, construction, the properly construct. So the buildings look like that today. And every factories, there is not enough fire extinguishers, not emergency exits or exit in those factories. And they do not have external fire exits to escape when it is emergency in the factories. But there is another core part of the problem that must be solved. It's time, and again, workers speak up with the concern about the safety risks. They are not listened to. Whenever workers, raise the voices, I'm just talking about 2 or 3 months back, or before maybe Rana Plaza, the workers' voice never been heard. Whenever they raise that, our electrical system is not working, we saw there is a spark in the cable, or we saw in the crack, but they were forced to keep doing their work, what they would do. So their right to refuse dangerous work always been denied. So when I say about right to refuse the dangerous work, I think of the Tajreen factory workers who smelled the smoke and tried to escape from the factory, but they were forced by the factory management to go back to their work. And lately, when they really found there is a fire in the factory, they tried to escape, but they saw the doors are locked, and the factory manager ran with the key, and the key's never been found. So the workers literally burned to ash in the factory. And when I talk about this right to refuse the dangerous work, I'm thinking of Rana Plaza workers. When the workers saw in the crack in the building and they refused to go inside the factory, when they have been threatened that their wages will be not paid, which was due to pay, and it been says that they will lose their job, and workers even slapped to the go to the factory next morning. Even it has been lied to them that the factory has been inspected, it is safe to work. The building owner, he says the factory will be live like 100 years, but it did not exist 100 minutes even. The factory collapsed with over 5,000 workers. So literally the workers' right to refuse the dangerous work always been overlooked and disregarded. This is why we are fear until GAP joins to the accord and bringing other American companies along with it, garment workers will continue to die. I mean, if they do not join, the workers in Bangladesh will continue to die in the factories, in these death trap factories. The low wages that keeps families in the cycle of the poverty, the repression of union rights, the unsafe death trap factories where workers works 12 hours in a day, these issues are all connected. The solution need to be address all these issues. And here is my message to the brands is, we don't want you to leave our country. There is no doubt we need these jobs. We want these jobs, but we want these jobs with dignity. When we talk about the changes, the change can be happen. It's happening, but there is still a long way to go. Let me briefly share some of them, advances and the challenges. So let's start with the advances. So here now, over 130 companies who signed this accord, which is an accord on Bangladeshi fire and building safety. And this is going to undertake and inspect nearly 2,000 factories where they're sourcing from. It just it's getting started, and it needs support from GAP and other companies so that it can be as effective as possible in saving lives. After 3 years, my worker center, Bangladesh Center for Worker Solidarity, has our registration status back. Finally, this month, all the falsified criminal charges that was brought against me has been dropped. But still, there is some union and federation leader facing all those criminal charges. The government is processing union registration these days. It is after huge pressure from international part, especially from US, when they suspended the trade privilege called GSP. The government has opened the window and giving registration to the unions, and last 8 months is over 60 union has been registered, which is a good sign. There is a new wage. It's more, but when you think about the inflation and the cost of living, $68 per month really is still a poverty wages. So what are the challenges? Well, speaking on the wages, how do we get the living wage? How do we get to a fair minimum wage with increasing tied to the inflation? Global companies, they just cannot stick to the divides of the wages. I think it is more than high time for them to increase the prices that for the product they source from our country so that our workers can get the minimum wage now. Most of the workers and the families affected by the Tajreen and Rana Plaza disaster, they're still looking forward for the compensation. Majority of them haven't received any compensation from the company, neither from the government or from the factory owners. So there's only 4 brand who just, step forward and said that they will pay the compensation, but it's still many to join. Many of them, especially from Rana Plaza, many of the brands are from Europe. So definitely we need your support to put them pressure to join in the compensation package. And from US, none of them step forward, not even pay any cents to these families. Many of these families pull their children out of the school because that is the best way they know. And many of them, they're living in a miserable condition. They don't have even money to bring food in the table, which is the condition for them. So we need a full and fair compensation to these, for these workers. Even though I have been jailed, confronted, and in the smallest space you can imagine that the psychologically tortured at the hand of the state, I'm still standing up today. My aspiration is putting human rights and labor rights at the center of the trade and development and efforts to the end poverty. It's listening to the voice of workers rather than silencing them. It's putting workers themselves at the center of decision making that affects them so that together we can build a future with more equality. The way that GAP can listen to the workers is to join the Accord. Thank you all for listening and giving your important time, your attention for your concern for justice and dignity for garment workers for my country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kalpona. Kalpona Actor has demonstrated how important it is to give a voice to those who would otherwise be unheard and to support them in their struggles. And the Public Eye Awards aim to do just that. We support campaigns by civil society organizations, and we enable the general public to voice their criticism. That's why every year, one of the Public Eye Awards is determined by popular vote, the Public Eye People's Award. This year, as Kumi Naidu has already mentioned, close to 300,000 people cast their vote online. And I now have the pleasure, and it really is my pleasure, to shame and announce the winner of the 2014 Public Eye People's Award, and the winner is Gazprom. You will now hear a speech by the nominating organization, which is Greenpeace Russia.
Hello, my name is Vladimir Chuprov and I'm managing head of Greenpeace Russia. With all my heart I would like to thank you all who support our nomination of Gazprom as most irresponsible company in the world. Gazprom is one of the most dirty oil corporations. I saw oil spills of Gazprom in Russian Siberia, and believe me, it's a dramatic picture. Dozen kilometers of territories covered by black oil, making them lifeless, destroying traditional life of local indigenous northern people. In 2013, Gazprom was the first company launched industrial oil mining in Arctic offshore. I saw intact Arctic, and I very believe that with this awarding we can influence policy of Gazprom, as well as other oil corporations seeking oil in Arctic offshore. We can force them to find alternative ways of development, which are renewable energy and energy efficiency. Thank you all once again, and only together we can change this world. Thank you all.
Greenpeace Russia couldn't be here today, I will now hand over this award to Michael Baumgartner from Greenpeace Switzerland. He will be accepting it on behalf of Greenpeace Russia.
Foto. Keestal.
We have now come to the end of the presentations, and we would like to offer you the opportunity to ask questions. We now have about 10 to 15 minutes, so if you would like to ask our panelists any questions, or also the members of the Public Eye Awards team, you can do so now. We will be circulating a microphone. Please just say who you are and who you're addressing your question to. I would also like to introduce to you Andreas Miesbach. He is a joint managing director at the Berne Declaration, and he's a Public Eye Awards veteran. So if you have any questions about Public Eye Awards, he'd be your guy. And I would also like to introduce to you Michael Baumgartner, who was just here accepting the award on behalf of Greenpeace Russia. He's responsible for corporate accountability at Greenpeace Switzerland. So he'll also be here, and you can ask him and Andreas, and of course our panelists, and also Kumi Naidu, who is also a member of the Public Eye Awards jury, any questions you would like right now. After the Q&A, we will proceed to the interviews. Anybody who would like to ask any questions, just raise your hand and you will pass it on to you.
Hello, my name is Claudio from Swiss News Agency. I want to ask Mr. Stabacek, in your opinion, what role has Switzerland to allow companies to make this unintended evil, how you call it?
What role has Switzerland as a country?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, every country has a role to play in this. Switzerland is a special country because it has been independent. Now, of course, when we talk of independence, it's difficult to be independent in certain situations. And of course, I don't want to draw historical parallels, but one of the biggest shames that we as Europeans, and now I mean all of us Europeans, have as the legacy of Second World War, is that the continental Europe is that the biggest enemy, the biggest heroes we have are neutral countries. And I have my full respect for the neutral countries, of course. But how could you possibly be neutral with all this evil? And I'm now including my country, which behaved even worse. We weren't even neutral, so to speak. So this sort of neutrality, this is another thing that seems quite interesting, because it looks like the body of economics is a neutral tool, like hammer or knife or fire. But in fact, if you look at it closer, it is already value-laden. So we should stop pretending that the institutions of the markets are neutral. They're value-laden in the same way that if you hold a hammer in your hand for too long, the world becomes one big nail for you that you simply want to hit. And if you hold a hammer for too long time, you will have a tendency to hit things. And that's the latedness of the system, which appears to be neutral. Now, Switzerland is one of the countries that I enjoy visiting the most. I think the Swiss people are extremely open to debates. I enjoy the open environment here in Switzerland. And if there's one thing that I think the world, or let's start with the European Union, can learn, is the way that you treat democracy here. And as you know, democracy has many forms, like capitalism has many forms. Capitalism 20 years ago in my country was something that I would never want to return to. Capitalism 100 years ago in most European or advanced countries was also something that we would never want to return to. So while I think that the institutions of Europe, let's say, that traditionally belonged to the national state are now withering, we must make sure that they not only wither upwards, but that they only, so that the nation is not withering only upwards to the supranational institutions, which in some cases I think is necessary, such as environment and banking regulation. You can't do that nation per nation. But also the role of a government is now withering downwards, which is, I think, exactly what's happening with regional legislation. So what Switzerland can do is to provide a debate platform, of which the World Economic Forum is a nice example. You have other St. Gallen Symposia and other. Secondly, to be a role model in democracy, being actually closer to people. And the reason why I love this country is it is a country in which politicians are becoming more and more irrelevant. And I will end with my most favorite observation about Switzerland, that you are a country who is blessed enough not to even usually know the name of your president. Which I really congratulate you, because unfortunately I have to know the name of mine.
There seem to be no other questions, I think, at the moment, so we will proceed to the interviews. I would just like to thank everyone for coming, and I would like to thank our speakers especially, and we have a little something for each of them.